Hey guys, welcome to our World War II timeline workshop. And the purpose of this is to make sure that we can place the documents that we're reading within the context of the war, what part of the war they were happening. So if you look at this sheet, hopefully you've already got your timeline glued in there. Make sure you leave most of the space up here because we're going to put all the documents that we have that we read down here. Where they fall on the timeline, and then just the major events of World War II are going to go above. So there'll be more things up here than there are down here. So very first, and we don't even have a spot for this because the timeline we would have had to go back way too far, is Unbroken. Unbroken took place in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, and so this was really the lead up. During the lead up to World War II. So we get a picture of what Germany looked like or what they were doing even before World War II started kicking into gear. So if you go a little bit further on September 1st of 1939, Germany invades Poland. So this was, I'm going to try and hopefully leave enough room. We'll see how that works. Germany invades Poland. This was what really sparked it, because when Germany invaded Poland, that was whenever France and Britain declared war on Germany, and this whenever people started to realize, okay, you know what, maybe this is something that's this is going to be something that's going to have to be dealt with. And so this was that first thing. They'd done a couple smaller things before, like took over Czechoslovakia, but this was one that was viewed as the Kickstarter. And anytime I talk about something that was in Europe, I'm going to put just an E. Some people would say that's the European theater. So maybe we'll do an ET, like the movie. And anytime I talk about something that takes place in the Pacific side of the war, I'll put a PT. So if we move a little bit further on into 1940, Germany basically rolls all the way across Europe, and they take a lot of the Poland. They've already taken Czechoslovakia, and then on June 14th of 1940, Germans march into Paris. So they basically, from that point forward, control France until the Allies run them out of there. Then on August 13th of 1940, so just a little bit after this, the Battle of Britain begins. August 13th. The Battle of Britain is, some of you guys will have that topic. What happened there is Germany, they never did like a land war in Britain, but they started flying their planes over, just dropping bombs on London, on England, just trying to weaken the British. And there's a lot of cool things. If you guys have ever read like the Chronicles of Narnia, the kids leave London and go out to the house out in the country to avoid the bombs during the Battle of Britain. So moving on June 22nd of 1941, some people would say this is one of the biggest mistakes that was ever made in the history of warfare, or one of them. Germany attacks Russia. And so Joseph Stalin was the leader of Russia at this point, and he basically had to let Germany do whatever they wanted to do. They'd make deals. They'd say, yeah, let's split up this country. Let's do this, and you can, yeah, sure, let's partition this country, and you want to take Poland, that's okay. And so Russia had kind of let Hitler do whatever he wanted, and then out of nowhere, Hitler attacks Russia. So now he's fighting a war on the Western Front, like France, and on the Eastern Front with Russia. And then as we get a little bit later, you're going to recognize some of these dates. December 7th, 1941, what Franklin Roosevelt said was a day that would live in infamy, was Pearl Harbor. This is when the Japanese surprise attacked America and bombed Pearl Harbor, and around 2,000 people died there. So this is we're going to see another book pop in here, And this is, we don't know the exact date, but towards the end of 1941 is when that document Mouse is covering. So this was Spiegelman's grandfather or father, I have to look back at it, who's recounting his time in the Holocaust, and he's starting out in the end of 1941, talking about whenever they're led from their homes into ghettos and places like that. So that Mouse was happening about the same time as Pearl Harbor. It was also early in 1942 is when the first proposition for the Navajo Code Talkers came along. And this was because their language was so hard to decipher that the Allies used them to relay messages so that the Germans and the Japanese couldn't decipher them. So this is around February. They didn't come into being for a little bit, but they were proposed then. And then March 11th, we didn't do everything with the Pacific Theater here, but this is kind of a big thing. MacArthur. So MacArthur, when we talk about him, that's General Douglas MacArthur, and he ended up being commander of all the forces in the Pacific. He's actually a guy from Little Rock. But he leaves for Australia. He'd been stationed in the Philippines, and the U.S. had been in the Philippines basically since even before World War I, like the beginning of the century. And the Japanese ran him off from there. From MacArthur leaves the Philippines for Australia, and he vows to come back at some point, which is kind of cool that I'll come back in later. So then, let's see. Moving up a little bit further, it's to June 4th, 1942, and I'm going to do a little bit of, I'm going to see if I can do this. We'll come up here. Yeah. June 4th. This is one of the major battles in the Pacific. June 4th was the Battle of Midway, and this was a huge naval sea battle between the Japanese and America, and this was kind of the turning point for the Japanese in the Pacific because we won. It was a huge victory. And set the Japanese back in a huge way. Then, okay, we'll keep going to 1943. 1943, and if you ever read All the Light We Cannot See, which is a pretty sweet book, it takes place basically over all of this time period from like 41 to 45. But the part that we read is based in 1943. And if you didn't catch on already, that was the French Resistance. That's what we were reading about right there. Then we also see a little bit after this. And so one thing you're going to find, we don't talk about Italy as much as we talk about Japan and as we talk about Japan and Germany, but Italy was the third member of the Axis powers, and they were led by a guy named Benito Mussolini. They were kind of like they were definitely running third. They were probably the third strongest, and they were the first to fall to the Allies. They fell in September 8th of 1943. Italy fell to the Allies. So we're going to start seeing a lot of things pick up right here, so I'm going to have to try and move pretty quickly to see if we can get through all of them. Okay, 1944, early in 1944, this is where we see Catch-22 takes place, and that's the battle in the Mediterranean. So that was that took place on a fictional island, but that hopefully gives us a little bit of idea what it would have been like to be stationed around those places like Italy during World War II. So Catch-22 was there. This is also where we see With the Old Breed, whenever they're on Pavuvu, and he actually ends up at some of the main battles in the Pacific. So this is that E.B. Sledge document. This was in the Pacific. So since we're in 1944, we're gonna see some major dates that we're gonna recognize. First one is June 6th. I'll give you a second to see if you can figure out what June 6th, 1944 was before I say it. But that was D-Day. This is where the Allied forces stormed onto the beaches of Omaha and Utah, and this is whenever the ground war starts to take back France and to beat the Germans in Europe. So this is a European theater. In August 25th, we see the liberation of Paris. And there are some cool stories. We'll have some other documents to put in your folder if you want to read them about what Paris was like after it was liberated. And all between this is where we see Band of Brothers. So that section that we see, D-Day, that's whenever you read Band of Brothers, this is where it's happening. Peleliu happens in September 15th, so kind of close to the end. This is one of the major battles in the Pacific, and E.B. Sledge ends up there. So the guy that wrote With the Old Breed ends up at Peleliu. Let's see, we're getting close. Okay. So very early in 1945 is where you're going to find Slaughterhouse 5 take place. So we're getting close to the very end of the war, and this is where the bombing of Dresden happens. And he's going to write a lot about that in Slaughterhouse 5. But Dresden was a German city that the Americans were trying to take towards the very end of the war. On December 16th, this is where we see the Battle of the Bulge. And December 16th, one of the things that I always think about the Battle of the Bulge is it was really cold. And there was a city called Bastogne that they went through in Band of Brothers, and they said, anytime for the rest of their life, whenever they said, "Oh, I'm really cold," they'd be like, "Hey, it's not Bastogne," because so think Battle of the Bulge was wintertime. This is where the Americans were it was kind of at a stalemate for a while, just in the middle between France and Germany. Let's see, we'll just throw a couple more on here. Okay, here we go. April 26th. This will be one that you can remember. April 26, 1945, Hitler kills himself. So this basically leads to VE Day, which is victory in Europe. And basically leads to the close of fighting in Europe. But that still leaves Japan. So Japan was still fighting. And what ended the wars in Japan came towards the end of 1945. The first thing that happened was August 6th, and this was the bomb in Hiroshima. So this was the first atomic bomb that was dropped on Japan by America. And Harry Truman, by this point, Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president of the country for most of World War II, had died. Harry Truman makes the decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. Well, they drop and they kind of wait to see, all right, is Japan going to surrender? And they don't. So August 9th, they drop another bomb on a town called Nagasaki. And it's after that, 6 days later, August 15th, Japan surrenders and we have VJ Day. So anytime you see VE Day means victory in Europe. Anytime you see VJ Day, victory in Japan Day. And just remember, Japan held out longer. And some people say, they say if we hadn't dropped the bombs, that basically the Japanese islands were outfitted with another I can't remember how many soldiers were waiting to fight, and they'd even equipped women and children to fight. Like there would have been millions of casualties to take those islands. And so Truman made the call to eventually just drop the bombs. Okay, so hopefully you got this in. This will give us kind of a context as we put documents in. Hopefully that helps. Thanks, guys.